So today I'm going to talk about Alan Moore's V for Vendetta. And what I have here, this is the 30th anniversary deluxe edition. It's a really nice one. So here's the inside artwork. This is probably one of his most influential, maybe his most influential story. He started it in 1982, and it was canceled after 2 issues. And then DC decided to allow him to finish it, or per- give him the ability to finish it. And that was in 1988. They'd had a lot of success with Alan Moore, and so this was probably one of their ways to thank him. So in 1988, they continued with it and released the other 10 issues. So he was able to complete the story that he wanted to. This was originally, the first 2 issues were released in Britain. And like so many stories in Britain, they were, or comics in Britain, they were originally without color. And then these were colorized. I don't think they look that great. And the thing with black and white is they tend to go with very heavy inking, and then once you add color to it, it can kind of look a little bit ugly. So it might have been better to just keep it in black and white, but this is how they produced it in the comics, and so they just carried it over. Um, so the book starts with right at the beginning, the voice of fate um, imploring all the citizens to make Britain great again. And so Britain has been taken over by a fascist state, and this phrase of "make whatever great again" is a tried and true slogan of fascists or fascist wannabes, um, going back to World War II. So that's why uh, Alan Moore employed it in 1982. Um, this is, of all his books, this is probably the most political that I can think of. V is an anarchist, and if you look at the logo here for V, it is pretty much the anarchist logo flipped upside down and then removed A, the crossbar for the A. So I think that's what Alan Moore was going for. I personally am not an anarchist. Um, he really kind of, Alan Moore kind of has V as his own mouthpiece for advocating for anarchy. So he would have been around 30 when he wrote this. And I think maybe he was, I want to say, a little naive, because I know that Alan Moore, what he seems to be advocating for is the elimination of the government, and his idea is that anarchy is chaos working well, operating well, and I think that that's rather naive. Um, there's a saying in science that nature abhors a vacuum, and if you get rid of the government, somebody's going to take the place, and it's not going to be the average person. And if there's one thing worse than government, it's probably being ruled over by unelected officials. And I'm certainly not. I mean, a fascist state is obviously a terrible thing, and a police state or anything. I just think they're. I'm not a fan of anarchy or Steve Ditko's idea of objectivism or libertarianism. I think that what you need is a balance. Um, and I think that that is a constant struggle to maintain that balance between um, public and private. But to go in one direction is, I think, a recipe for disaster. So I think it's really good story. Again, I just have some issues with it, but I like the fact that Alan Moore spoke his mind, and I think maybe more writers should do that. Whether I agree with him or disagree with him. Now, there's certain stories. If somebody writes a story called, white supremacist man who fights for white supremacy, I don't think I'm interested in reading about that. Um, I think that the early in it's basically V's uh, revenge story against those people who tortured him, and he has superpowers, but it's more just like super fast, super skilled, super whatever, rather than any kind of exotic powers. After he disposes or he enacts his revenge, I think the story loses a little bit of the momentum. Um, like he's kind of fighting against the whole fascist state. Uh, but I think it's a little naive. He does a couple bombings and then gets the people to rise up, and I don't think that would work. I also think that in this story, his idea seems to be that the fascist state just took over, and that's not the way it works. Generally, they get enough popular appeal that there is a certain percentage of the public that supports the movement, the fascist movement. Um, and even in the worst throes of fascism, there is still generally a significant portion of the population. Whereas here, it seemed like it was just a takeover that had no popular appeal. That was the impression I got. And then you have people rising up and wearing the Guy Fawkes mask. And then at some point, V does die. Spoiler alert. Sorry if I. But he passes on as if he could simply give his identity to someone else. But that doesn't really kind of make sense to me. It would be like Batman finding someone on the street and saying, "Now you're Batman." And Batman obviously was a highly skilled and talented and whatever, and you just can't pass on that. And with V, it's even more so because V was talented beyond human ability because of what had been done to him. Um, so it's a great story. I highly recommend it, but I don't necessarily agree with all the politics in there. I agree with it more than some of the other politics of like Steve Ditko. But by and large, Alan Moore generally keeps his politics to himself. He'll talk about it in interviews, but I think to his massive credit, he was able to make Rorschach in The Watchmen as a sympathetic character and allow him to express his Rorschach's views, even though they conflicted with Alan Moore's own. So he didn't just create Rorschach as a straw man to beat up. And so I think that Alan Moore is really good at giving perspectives that he doesn't necessarily agree with, and I think that's a real credit to his writing. I think the this 30th anniversary deluxe edition is really nice. I had the paperback, but sold that when I got this because it's a better compilation or a better presentation. It's an interesting matte finish on here, and then you have the color, the shiny logo. There's also a 10 page interview, or I guess just discussion with Alan Moore about V for Vendetta, but it was actually written as he was still working on it. So it was back in the 80s that that he wrote that. But I think this is a really, really, really good, interesting story. They did make a movie, and I think the movie was a good interpretation. I think that of the movies that made with Alan Moore's material, I would definitely put this in Watchmen. I can't remember what kind of changes they made in the movie. The Watchmen, the big change was the ending, and I hated how they changed the ending. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was trash. And what's the other? Oh, From Hell. I don't really remember because I only watched it once, and it was many many years ago. But I definitely recommend this one. Anyway, this is V for Vendetta, the 30th anniversary deluxe edition.